last fall was your cemetery walk last October. I got to participate in the Denmark Historical Society, or the Big Black Creek Historical Society cemetery walk at the Denmark Cemetery. And I had been in cemetery walks before, but I'd always played people who had been dead a long time. And Bobby and Liz had asked me to help with that, and it was really interesting because I was portraying Fonville Neville, who had been their local historian and has only been dead since 1979.
Oh.
So
He had a sense of humor, they seem like.
it was a little different knowing that half of these people coming through had known the man. But luckily what I was able to do was not talk so much about him, but relay his stories because he was the storyteller.
And you did a fantastic job.
Well, thank you, but I really, and as a part of that, I told Liz, I said, yes, I'll be glad to do it, but in return. Bobby and Liz are here to tell us tonight about Denmark and the history of the area. Some of you that aren't from this area probably don't know much about Denmark, so this is gonna be news to some of them. And then some that, like Joanne, she was there when I founded Disney. Oh, okay, I'm gonna turn it over to y'all.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us. I'm gonna say, first of all, and I didn't realize that some people might not know where Denmark is, so you want to tell them?
It's,
Can't get there from here.
you can, but it's tricky. It's southwest of Jackson, out past the airport, about 5 miles past the airport. You go out there and there's not a whole lot left down there now with the church and the post office. But there's a lot of people that have ties to Denmark, one way or another. And one way of putting it is Denmark's a nice place to be from. But there are really a lot of families that got their start in Denmark and a lot of prominent people, and it's amazing to see the changes that Denmark has gone through. There was an old gentleman that lived down there, and he used to tell me when we'd have a historical meeting and we'd be talking about it, the next day at the post office, and he'd come in there and he'd say, well, one thing about Denmark, it's got a lot of history.
Okay, well, we're Bobby and Elizabeth Johnson, and I've been a resident of Denmark since 1981 when I married this fella, and he's been a resident since he was born, 1955, so you can figure out how old he is. and we love it there. So anyway, this is a picture I thought I'd show. There's Ricky and Brenda who helped us with our cemetery walk, and these are some of the people that are on our Big Black Creek board. And some of them are just people from the community that helped us out with the cemetery walk. And it's a lot of fun, and we want to try to make it an annual event. It used to be, and then we quit doing it, so we're hoping to go back
I
to
think
it.
I was in the first Denmark group side.
Okay.
Denmark Cemetery.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's been years ago, yeah. The Big Black Creek Historical Society was created in 2006 by Mr. Billy King, and some of you may know Mr. Billy or have known him. And he is truly missed, because I was telling somebody he was our biggest fundraiser, which is a hard thing, and he didn't do it with bake sales and spaghetti suppers. He did it on a grand scale, thousands of dollars at a time.
Right.
So, and grants and things like that. And the purpose of Big Black Creek was to identify, preserve, and promote historical sites within the communities of Denmark, Mercer, Layton, and Woodland, all small towns of West Tennessee. Tonight, we're just gonna talk about Denmark, mainly. Denmark Historical Society, which Bobby and I were both a member of, preceded the Big Black Creek. We founded it in 1990, because we realized, well, the Presbyterian had given up the church at that point. They gave it up in the 80s. And so we realized, something's gotta be done if we're gonna preserve this church. And Miss Altruth Hardy and Miss Louise Stevens were instrumental in starting the Denmark Historical Society, and we carried on for quite a few years. And we did some big fundraising. We had Denmark Days, and we did started some restoration of the church. Now, we did, with the Denmark Historical Society, we did things like painting in the roof and some structural things. But Mr. Billy realized if we didn't do some real major structural things, it was gonna fall, that, especially the west wall. So he had, the structural stabilization project that went on, and in 2012, they shorted up with concrete and steel and tried to make it back the way it was as much as possible. And, we hope it's gonna live for quite a few more 100 years, if possible. That's our thing. And here's the Denmark church today, and you can go out there and see it. It's a majestic church. It was built in, 1854, yeah. It was organized though in 1821 on the banks of Johnson Creek, which is actually across from where the sheriff's department is now. So that's where the church was organized. It was organized by John Johnston and John Wharton, and David Weir was the preacher, and it was called Hopewell. And then in 1933, they moved it to Denmark, because during that time, from the 20s to the 30s, Denmark was really growing and becoming a big place. So that's when they moved it. And then the present structure was built in, like I said, in 1854. But before that, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, and the Methodists were all meeting in the same schoolhouse, and they would alternate Sundays. And so one Sunday, the Baptists and came on the Presbyterian day. Not a happy sight. And so the Presbyterian, they got really upset about it, and so they got some land from Major Joab Wilson, which you will hear his name several times, and built a church, just a longhouse, a church in 6 days. And they called it Jonas Gourd, because it was built, you know, in such a hurry with their labor. So that's pretty neat. The present structure was built by the Snipes brothers, and they were residents of Denmark, and with slave labor. And you can look inside and see, it's just amazing. It has an upstairs that you can go in, and we would invite anybody to come and visit if you want to. Just give us a call and we'll show you through. The preacher was J.W. Gillespie, and he received a salary of $1,200 a month. That's big money.
Wow.
Back in 1854.
Well.
So they thought a lot of him, and he preached there for many, many years. Serious time. So, you know, and a 2-story building was quite a feat back then, you know, so they, you know, it's very impressive, and we're so proud that it still stands today. Upstairs is the Masonic Lodge of the Denmark Danes, and it was organized in 1828, and they are actually on the original deed with the church, the Denmark Presbyterian Church and the Masonic Lodge are on the deed together. It's so neat to go up there, because it's a winding staircase. You go up, and they got their Masonic stuff up there that you can, you know, see, and we've got lots of pictures and things that you can go through and look. Got a lot of papers there, historical papers, and it was also a prison after the Battle of Britain's Lane, and it housed 87 federal prisoners, and there are places on the wall where they wrote their name and the year, and we put plexiglass over that so you can see that, and it won't be destroyed. So we thought that was a pretty neat thing. Is that right? Here's a picture of the church in the early days, probably a dinner on the ground. I don't know what year it was taken, but they were still running horseback, so, you know, it was a few years back. One thing I want to talk about is the bell at Denmark Church. It was said to have been cast with silver that the ladies of the community donated. And some things you read say it was cast in North Carolina, some say it was cast in Pennsylvania, we don't really know where. But it has been outside the church for all those years, and it still stands. It's really a beautiful bell, and they say you could hear it for 7 miles around. And it was used for a fire alarm. It was used, you know, to call the congregation to church. It was used when they sent the Denmark Danes off to the Civil War, off to Jackson to join up. It was told when the first shots at Britton Lane were fired. There's a story that Mr. Neville wrote about with the firing of the first shots and the tolling of the bell. So it's got a rich history. I won't tell too much about the Confederacy because we're mainly talking about Denmark, but one interesting story that came about was there was a soldier who was home on leave, and the Federals were camped all outside the church there on the grounds. And so he hid underneath the church because he was scared, that he'd get captured. And when it got dark, and the Federal soldiers were kind of having a good time back there, he crawled up under the bell, and there were some bushes there, and he was hiding in the bushes. When it got good and dark, and they got good and happy, he'd be ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell, and all their horses stampeded. And so they went off to get their horses, and he went across to the saloon and had him a good time. That was a good story with that. Another tale involving Confederate soldiers and the church. In fact, there's a plaque in the church that tells about it, where two young men were home on leave visiting their girlfriends or sweethearts, and the Federal soldiers surrounded the church, and they were coming in to search the church, to see if there were any Confederates there, and they are said to have hid under the hoop skirts of their sweethearts and avoided being found. So that's a cute story too. And there's a plaque in the church, but now I've worn one of those hoop skirts, and I don't think
I don't know if it's a true story that Denmark did not flourish because when the railroads came, they first talked to Denmark about the railroad.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that, yeah.
I don't know if it's a true story.
We'll get there, yeah, it is, it's true.
We don't know if any of this is true, because we weren't there, but we're
Yeah.
basing on what people have talked about and written.
Yeah. Now, in the
Grandmother told the
1840s,
skirt story, and she was born 1860 something, and she told the skirt story. So, and with the church there, so I think the skirt story is true.
So she was here with the people that were there that morning.
Yeah, I think that's true.
well, there were three churches in the 1840s that began. The Methodist Church, which originally met on the Big Black Creek around the 30s, but it built its church in 1842 on land donated by Joab Wilson. I told you would hear that name again. The Big Black Creek Baptist Church was right across from the Methodist Church, and it was founded by Obadiah Johnson in 1823, again in the brush arbors. And that's the Baptist church pictured in 1909, so that's not the original church, but it's been rebuilt. But we don't have a whole lot of old pictures, which I am real remorseful for. I wish we had more old pictures because I love them. And then, of course, the Denmark Presbyterian Church organized in 1821 and moved to Denmark in 1833. So 3 churches. The Presbyterian Cemetery there at Denmark is kept up by a trust, so it's well kept. I think this is very interesting, and I read about it. If you look, see all these stones that look just alike? Well, and there's several instances of that in the cemetery, and I thought, that is really strange, that they all look just alike. Well, the reason for that is, when someone died, they just buried them and marked it the best they could. But the stone maker would come through once a year, and he would have his stones, which were all just alike, and then he would carve the names and set them out. So the older ones are the ones that look just alike, and I guess, I don't know whether it was money or what, that the people got those stones. Now, later on, the stones are more elaborate. You can tell they got them from different places. But I thought that was really...
Looking at my great.
That's the reeds, yes.
Right there with the stones and great grandparents.
Yes.
Yeah, those are them.
Yeah, these are the reeds right here, and we're gonna talk about them in a little bit. Miss Joanne knows a lot about them.
I'm not talking, I'm
Oh,
talking.
okay.
You know how nice I am.
The oldest grave in the cemetery is John Morton in 1824. We don't know if this is the same John Morton that founded the Presbyterian Church, but you kind of feel like, yeah, probably, or at least they had ties to him. And that stone is broken and it's laying on the ground, but it is the oldest one there
That we know of.
that we know of. Correct. The old Methodist cemetery is behind where the Methodist church was, and there's a road that leads up to it. People have stolen the wrought iron from around the graves. That one marks off the Meriwether plot. Listen, you might know something about the Meriwethers. And real interesting, this one right here, Mr. Billy found when they were cleaning up the place, because they're marked off like in family plots. They're fenced in family plots. And this one was way outside the other ones, and they were taking a break, and they were resting, and just kind of standing around under some trees, and they found this. This is the grave of Adolphus Britton, as in Britton's Lane. So, that was a big find for Mr. Billy, and he was so excited.
Yeah, he had looked for the.
Yeah, he had looked forever
his
for it.
grave for five years.
Wow.
And they cleaned up, was it
52 cemeteries.
52 cemeteries in the surrounding area. I mean, a lot of them are little family cemeteries and small, but, you know, you go to a lot of trouble to find these records and then go out and actually locate them. And you'd be surprised how many people come around and say, we're the such and such, you know. Do you have any idea where our cemetery is? And after they did that, we've been able to take them out and show them a lot of them. And a lot of them have really nice fences, and after, you know, we cleaned them up and everything, they're pretty nice little cemeteries.
Yeah.
But, and that one, those pictures don't really do it justice. We went down there and took those other night. There's, it's not as overgrown as it looks. There's some kind of
It's a ground
somebody's
cover.
put, it's a ground cover, and it really looks pretty nice.
So there are not a lot of weeds, it's mostly ground
But
cover.
that's where on Adolphus Britton's is, it's completely out of way from everything. And when Mr. Lee stuck his shoulder down to get something, he said, something's here, and they scratched around there, and he said, there he is after all this time. And that was kind of overgrown, but it's a neat cemetery, all these old cemeteries.
Very neat, yeah. All right, let's go to
There
the
are
Baptist
family
cemetery.
cemeteries out there too.
What?
And family cemeteries, they were on their property.
Oh, yes, on their
Wait,
property.
Even like this, my uncle, Jimmy at the house.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me my husband's grandfather was buried out there under a tree.
Yeah, there are two.
And he
there are
died.
two tombstones back there behind the house.
And it's my husband's family. And they are buried in our own and that's next to my family property. So they all knew each other in the 1830s and
Yeah,
1840s.
because we were taking a walk one
Did you
day, and I said,
find
oh, there are two tombstones there.
Okay, I'll send my son Fred out there to check them out.
Yeah, they were there last time I saw them. Well, this is the Baptist cemetery. It is also called the Baptist Burying Ground or the Old Soldier Cemetery. Don't know why, but those are all names that it went by. It's really majestic with these cedar trees. It's beautiful. And it is behind Norma Briley's house, which is where Miss Louise Stevens used to live.
Where
Stevie Carter, yeah, lived, and which is right next to the post office, so you have to get permission. We don't get permission, but, you know, we asked Norma, can we walk back there? Sure, you know, she don't want you driving through her yard, but anyway. And the Big Black Creek cleaned it up, and there were a lot of them. Joab Wilson is buried there, and you think, well, why was he buried there when he gave all that money to the Methodist church? Because he was a big Methodist. Well, he lived right across the street, and he wanted to be buried there close where he was. This is, the wife of Jay Skillern, and you'll hear that name later also. And right here is where there were two big, stone posts. And they say, there's a story, you wanna tell the story about the
Well,
hidden?
they always told that there was gold hidden under the gates there at the old cemetery. And at some point in time, somebody went back there and there was a huge hole. Somebody had dug this huge hole and there was an impression of a box in the ground, you know, square. And supposedly it was $30,000 in gold. And so they think somebody may have actually found it. But now, you can't prove any of it, you know.
Yeah.
People make up stuff and people tell things and stuff's passed down. You know, who knows? But
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting.
Elizabeth,
Mhm.
I had understood it was called the Old Soldier Cemetery because
Right.
the Revolutionary War soldier buried there.
Okay.
And I believe the story that I've heard is they took him up and moved him to another cemetery close to Edward County.
Okay.
And if you'll talk to me someday, I'll see.
But
if I can
originally
get
it was
the facts
Revolutionary. Okay.
About the other soldier.
That's why they named it that. That's interesting.
And there's a lot of that that's gone on where they've gone in and they've moved people from one cemetery to another because the family won't do it. And you know, you think, I don't think I want to do that, but some people, you know, it's been done
Yeah.
several times.
Yeah. And I've always wondered why the Baptist burying ground wasn't over there by the Baptist church.
Is that cemetery you said is across the street?
Across from the big
From the
church.
Presbyterian?
It's
Behind
across
the
from the
house
Presbyterian
across from
church.
it.
Mhm.
I know
know one time when they had one of your walks, is that the cemetery where they have a lot of the flat marble
Yes,
things that
yes.
almost have a story on
Yeah.
there, so.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I actually did one of the things back in.
You did, Joe,
That's
yes,
right.
yeah.
It's been 8 or 10 years.
Yeah, we went to that.
Yeah.
That was,
It's good. Well, the early settlers in Denmark, according to Emma N. Williams in her book Historic Madison, these were some of the names: Meriwether, you might recognize some of them, Austin, Bond, Harbor, Wilson, Bryant, Johnston, Neely, Hart, Alexander, Tyson, McBride, Reed, Williamson, Murchison, Skillard, Moore, McMillan, Utley, Robinson, Rice, and Waddell. And I can name others too, but those are the ones that she listed as the earliest settlers to Denmark. And you have to remember, Denmark was settled starting in the 1820s. It was the largest town in West Tennessee in 1820.
The Tysons, McBride, Reed, McMillan, and I believe the Murchisons are all married to sisters.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll notice a lot of the
Married
names, yeah,
sisters in
yeah,
North Carolina.
Yeah.
And they came
yeah.
here.
And that's what I was gonna say. You wonder, how did these people get here? Why did they come? Well, Andrew Jackson signed a treaty with the Chickasaw Indians after the War of 1812. And in 1818, he signed this treaty, and they were land grants. And if you had fought in the War of 1812, then you were entitled to so much land here in Denmark. And so the Estanaula Trail actually starts in North Carolina. And Estanaula is the Indian word for here we cross. And so it starts in North Carolina, and they came to Denmark, just because of their land grants. And Mr. J.W. Reed, that was Mr. Birmingham's ancestor, yeah, he lost his arm in the War of 1812. And, so he got a lot of land.
No, he didn't get it that way. The sisters, you heard the Ramsey Rice grant in
Yes,
Okay, there were Ramseys.
Okay.
They got the land in their father.
From the Ramseys.
He got it in 1780 politically when they were, and was holding on to it.
Okay.
After he dies and the land opens up,
Okay,
they all came,
They came, yeah.
all the husbands had, they now had land.
Yeah.
So they all came.
and the Rices are connected with Harvard Alexander, and that's how they got here,
So
so.
that's where all of those came.
And a lot of them came also by the river, and Bobby's gonna talk a lot about the river and how they got here, from the river. But again, largest town in West Tennessee in 1820, it is said that, Denmark lost the right to the county seat by one vote. So, we could have been a county seat, who knows? Early life in Denmark, the post office was established in 1820, and it continually runs today, so it's the oldest one running in, Tennessee. Denmark was incorporated in 1829. By 1840, it was a bustling town, and by 1850, it was in its grandeur. Several schools, 2 academies, the male and female institutes were there. The female institute was right behind the Denmark Presbyterian Church. Lots of schools. There were 17 stores, 2 hotels, saloons they called doggeries, 3 lawyers, 8 doctors, tannery, undertaker. And we have a map, yeah, that was 1860, and you can look and see.
You may not be able to see much, but y'all welcome to look at it.
And I always get my bearings by where the church is. Where is it? Oh, that's the Methodist church.
Is
We're down here, okay. Yeah, because, the Presbyterian church down here. The Meriwethers had a hotel, and the Jets had a hotel. So those 2 hotels were the mainstay, and you could take a stagecoach from, Jackson to Denmark, and it, came out of the Meriwether Hotel, and the charge was $1.25, which I thought was a lot. But the stage did run, from Jackson here. This is an old post office. It's not the original post office, but it is an old picture. Post office has been several different places. At one time, it was in Robert Hardy's store. That's when Bobby started carrying the mail. It was in Robert Hardy's store. They didn't have a phone. They'd have to knock on the wall for Mr. Hardy to do the phone.
He'd have a phone in the store, and if somebody called the post office, he'd knock on the wall. We can go over there and see what they want.
But now the post office is its own. It's like a little trailer, but it's its own space. But it is still operating today. So, Bob's got a good story about the roads.
Yeah, these roads, a lot of them have, a lot of them are still there, a lot of them have changed, but, there's only 2 county roads.
Okay, go
There are
ahead.
2 county roads there in Denmark, and, you know, the one going down to Urban Barnes Road is one of them, and then the one that goes to the Denmark Presbyterian Cemetery is a county road, and they keep it up, but all these other roads are gone. But, I was down there working on the cemetery one day last summer, and we had a limb fall, which if you've ever dealt with old cemeteries, you know that's an ever-present thing. But anyway, I came out, and there were these 2 young boys there, and they were from, up in Connecticut, and they were, history buffs. And they'd been going all around the country, and they'd been down to the battlefield, and he said they looked all day for this road that's behind the battlefield down there. And, I said, well, it's not there anymore. I said, you know, the people who own the land have taken it over, and it's probably some farmer's field. And they said, well, we had a map that showed it was there. I said, well, it was 100 years ago. Things changed. But anyway, I said, they were talking about the church. I said, well, would y'all like to go in? I've got a key. So I took them in, and they went in, and they, you know, and I was supposed to be somewhere, and I was kind of in a hurry, and I said,
That's
well,
kinda aggravating.
I said, I'll let you in, you know, and they said, man, could we go upstairs, you know, because I told them. So I let them go upstairs, and they looked around, and I kind of rushed them out of there, but anyway, they were going back to the cemetery when I left, and I just left it with it. But you'd be surprised how many people come to Denmark because they've seen it on the map, or that there are like 22 Denmarks in the United States. But we had people, I know when I worked at the post office, we'd have people that would come from the country of Denmark and would come and want to see Denmark because, you know, and they thought, well, it's got some kind of tie to Denmark, but it really doesn't, but I'll get that in a minute.
I believe that, you know, there was a road that went from Pinson to Denmark.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's not
And
there.
that road bed is still,
Yeah, I
it's
know.
still there if you know where to
But
look.
they actually had a road that is on some
Now,
road.
these were some of the oldest homes in Denmark. This is the Reed House, and that's Miss Birmingham's ancestors. And Bobby and I actually lived there for 12 years, something like that. It's a beautiful house. It sits up on a hill. It's got, front to back, you know, dog trot, and the rooms off each side, 13-foot ceilings. It's gorgeous, 4 fireplaces, and, we just loved it. But anyway, it was built, it took, from what I understand,
I don't remember.
Birmingham, it took several years to build. They had their own brick kiln, they saw their own lumber, it's built with poplar, and it's also built with slave labor. And, there are a lot of Civil War stories that go with it, that Colonel Faulkner, who is an ancestor of William Faulkner, was there and had to escape in his underwear one time. Mr. DeVille wrote about that. Federal and Confederate troops camped out on the lawn. It's got a huge lawn on the way to the road. So a lot of Civil War stories go with it, but it's one of the oldest ones in the county. This one,
When we lived there, we had parties there, and we'd have barbecues and parties, and all our friends called that the happy house. And it was, our
happy
kids
house.
were young, and it was the best time of our life, and we really have some good memories of that
I
house.
have a grandson who wants to buy it so bad.
Yeah.
And we keep saying, be practical, you have children.
well, and Bobby said, I don't wanna grow old here because of the upkeep.
It was a lot of.
You know, it just,
That's what
yeah.
I'm trying to
He
do.
said, I can't grow old here. So anyway, this one is the Shaw House, and it's on Duncan Lane. It was built in 1831. And it also has a lot of history that goes with it. And it's also referred to sometimes as the Duncan House because, Dr. Duncan, who was a doctor in Denmark, and resided there. This was, and it burned in 2021, right after the pandemic, and we were so sad. This was the Hardy home, and it originally started out as the Harbor Brothers home. And then the McKissicks bought it, and then the Hardys bought it and lived there, up through when Ruth, after Miss Ruth died, then the McKissicks bought it back. And the McKissicks are rebuilding, but it was one of the older homes, and it was built in 1846. So those are some old houses. And this is just just an old picture I had of some school children. I don't even know what school, but it was a school there in Denmark. And at first I thought, oh, that's in front of the church, but it's not, because those aren't the windows, but, I love old pictures, so, one of my favorites. Okay, Bobby's gonna give us some talk about the river and the river trade.
Okay. You know, I'm gonna start out talking a little bit about the Indians, because, you know, it all started with the Indians. You know, we took the country away from the Indians, and, anyway, we had a lot of Indians in Denmark. Denmark has a lot of their historical sites. The Big Hill, which is on the map here, and it's marked by this big circle, but it's on the road going out toward the Reed House out of Denmark. And Mr. Novell said it was a ceremonial place for the Chickasaw Indians. And I have been up there. I used to bird hunt up there, and there were sandstone things up there and different things. And you know, I didn't know much about Indian stuff, but you know, that's what he always said. But anyway, there's some burial mounds out off of the Estanaula Road. They're on the Chalker farm that Harvard Alexander's descendants own it now. But University of Memphis, their architectural, not architectural, their archaeological group is they're doing a study out there now on one of the mounds. And I don't know what all they'll find, but anyway, they're in the process on that. It's a long, slow process. But those mounds are huge. I mean, you go out there and if you didn't know that's what it was, you'd think, well, that's just a hill with trees on it, because they have big trees on them, but they're big old hills. And, you know, the land out there is flat. There's not hills left. They say they took pans of dirt and carried it out there and built those, and it's just hard to imagine, because, you know, they're probably over 100 feet high, and, you know, just humongous. But anyway, and that's where Denmark got its name. The Indians, it was a good place for them to hunt. They had good luck there. And on the big hill there, they called that the mark of the den, because there was a den where animals were, and they had good luck there. So they called it the mark of the den, and over the years it got called Denmark. And it doesn't have a Danish tie at all.
You know that West Tennessee really was a hunting ground for the Chickasaw Indians. It was not, they didn't actually live on the West Territory of West Tennessee.
But they came, and they said they would come and hunt, and they would go to those ceremonial mounds and do things, you know, I don't know what they do, but that's what they told. But, anyway, the rivers, is that Swan Spring?
Mm-hmm.
You know, rivers were the original arteries that people used to travel. You know, there's a reason why Memphis and Nashville and Knoxville and Cincinnati, Chattanooga, St. Louis, Chicago, there's a reason why those big towns are there. It was because the rivers were there, and they could get their commerce up and down the river. And, you know, we think, well, that's interesting enough, but a lot of the people that came in the early 1820s, they came from, the Rices, who were and I keep talking about Harvard Alexander, because Harvard Alexander people had a big part of down there. And he was the predecessor to Richie Long. He was the county historian, and I'm sure y'all all know, knew Harvard. But I guess it was his great-granddaddy, John Rice, came from Ohio down the Mississippi over to the Hatchie. He came up the Hatchie and landed at Estanaula Landing, and he got an original grant down there close to the river, and they still have that to this day, and it's the Hatchie Rice Hunting Club. And but that's how they got their start in this area. And Elizabeth didn't say, but Joanne still owns the original part of their part of the Reed plantation.
Yeah, given to my great grandmother in 1890.
Right. I it's neat. Anyway, this is the Boiling Springs, and this is not a very good picture either, but I didn't have one actually of the springs, but there below Denmark, if you go out 223 like you're going to the battlefield, when you get to where the bridges cross, there's a marshy area there. And in the summertime, this is actually Big Black Creek. And in the summertime, this is virtually dry. But it does have water in it all the time because there are springs all around there, and you really, when the water's down in the wintertime, is the only time you can really go in there and see. I mean, you could go in there in the summertime and see them, but I wouldn't. But there's definitely cottonmouths in there. But it's pretty neat to see that water coming up out of the ground, you know, and it's pretty impressive. You know, if you've seen artesian wells, you know how they are. Well, there's bunches of them, and it feeds that creek, and that goes all the way to the Hatchie River. And that was the way that they actually they used the river, and that's the reason why Denmark wound up being where it is, because they would take and they would bring flatboats from Memphis with goods on it, and when they get down to Estanaula, they put those flatboats in the Big Black Creek, and then they would fell trees or drag trees across and do like a beaver and build a dam, and that water would back up far enough and they kept the sides clean so they could take oxen or mules or horses and pull those flatboats all the way up to this bridge right there at Denmark. And they would unload all that stuff, and then they would take it back down to the river, take the logs out, the flatboat would go back in the river, and they'd load it up with stuff going back to Memphis. And usually what they would load it with was cotton. Haywood County and Madison County have always been good areas to grow long staple cotton. And that's what people really want. You know, they want the long staple. And so they would warehouse as many as 3,000 bales of cotton down at Estanaula, which, how many of you have ever been to Estanaula? How many of you have ever heard of it? I know Brenda and Rick have, because I took them down there.
And I gotta tell you, I live in the northeast part of the county, and that's southwest. It is two different worlds.
It absolutely is.
You might as well be 1,000,000 miles away from
But it's
those
not a
people.
very good road to get down there to it, but that's Estanaula Landing, and I don't think you can really see it. But there are two wires going across here, up there. There's some electric lines up here, but those wires there are a catwalk. And the guy from Southwest Electric, Fred Johnson, has a cabin across the river. And the meter reader gets on those two wires and goes across the river and read their meter every month. Wow. And I guess they still do it that way. We used to go down there and climb up on there and jump off into the river. But, you know, people come up with ways to do everything. But anyway, Estanaula is kind of a secluded area now, but at one time there were two hotels there, the Meriwether and the McBride Hotel. And you'd think, why in the world would anybody have hotels there? Well, people in Memphis would get on the steamboats, and they would come down the Mississippi and get in the Hatchie, and they would come up there, they'd spend the night in the hotels, they'd get back home the next day, and they'd go back to Memphis. Well, they gambled. They gambled all the way down there, they gambled all the way back. And people who like to gamble, they've been doing it as long as time, I guess. But they enjoyed it enough that they supported two hotels down there. But that's what I was getting to. They did ferries, like if you came from Jackson and wanted to go to Memphis, you would come down the Estanaula Road, and you get on the ferry, go across the river, and go over to Somerville, and then on to Memphis. And they had a lot of trouble with ferries. You know, who all's been on a ferry? Has everybody been on a ferry? Okay. You know, now, there's not many left. The last ones there were, you drive your cars on, you know, go across. But used to, they would transport wagons and horses and people and stuff. And they were all the time having trouble. They had, Joab Wilson had a ferry down there at Estanaula, and, he had an accident, and some people got killed, and they did away with the ferry, and the Indians built the original Estanaula Trail, from Denmark down there. And he came in and made it a good road, and he built a bridge there, which, you know, made it really nice, and then people would use the bridge and go across. Well, the bridge kind of deteriorated, and they had some trouble, some people got killed in the river. So they did away with the bridge, and they built a new ferry. And they went to launch the new ferry. There were two 10-year-old boys that were on the ferry when they pushed it off the logs to go off in there. Well, something happened, and the thing caught up, and it sunk in the river and killed the two young boys. And you know, that created a big stir too. But they built the metal bridge. You got it?
Yeah.
They built it nowhere. They had a lot of trouble. The two brothers that died on the ferry were the Ford brothers. And a lot of people during the Civil War, Dr. Bedford Forrest and his crew, they camped down there at Estanaula, and they'd get across the river, and you know, late in the day, and at night, the next morning before daylight, they'd take off, and nobody would even know they were there. But there's a lot of history that has to deal with that, but if you go down there now, there's nothing down there. I mean, it's absolutely nothing down there. But, they had a lot of different tragedies. Jesse James' gang even is said to have hung out down there, so. But, this is the old bridge at Hatchie Station, and it's kind of interesting. It's fallen into disrepair. And the reason is, they had the road there that went from Jackson, and it's a good road if you want to go down there. It's a good road to go to Hatchie Station. But Haywood County's on the other side of the bridge, and Madison County's on this side. Well, the bridge needed repairs, and the Haywood County people said, well, we're not paying for it. And the Madison County people said, well, we shouldn't have to pay for the whole thing. So they kind of butted heads about it, and neither one of them paid for it, and the bridge to this day has never been used anymore. If you go down there, it doesn't even have any boards, it's just the metal, you can kind of see it. And but it's been that way all my life. And I'm pretty old, so I'm probably 75 or 80 years since anybody went across the bridge. But that goes across the Ville, though, which you can go to Whiteville, Somerville, and on to Memphis. But there's not even a road on the Haywood County side. They just wash their hands of the whole thing. But that's politics for you. Do I?
Yeah,
Maybe so. But interesting thing, there where the bridge is, if you go, there's a little canal that goes back in there, and then there's a huge open, it's like a lake in there, and old timers call that the basin. And that's where the steamboats, they'd come down from Memphis, and they'd go up in that canal, and they'd get in that basin, and they could turn around. And then they'd come back out and go back to Memphis. They couldn't turn around. The Hatchie River, most places, not any wider than this room. And those big steamboats, there's no way for them to turn around. So they'd go down to Hatchie Station, turn around, go back to Memphis. It was kind of, people had ways of making things work out. And it's interesting, the stuff that they come up with.
Bobby, after you told me about that, I looked, and it's very visible on Google Earth.
Oh, yeah.
The basin,
Yeah, it's big.
it's obvious where you can see the
We
turnaround
fished
up in there
down there,
just
we
down
used
from
to go back
Hatchie
in there and fish, there's lots of big cypress trees, but it's still open out there in the middle. And it's kind of a unique place for sure, but some of the first steamboats, one of the very first ones was called the Red Rover. And, one of them was called the Denmark, one of them was called the Native, and one of them was called some name I've never heard of, Tinterent. I'm not sure that must be French or something. But But anyway, that was kind of, you know, that's the reason why Denmark got to be as big as it was, because they would bring that stuff up Big Black Creek. And, I'm trying to think, who was it? The Harbor Brothers.
Yeah.
They had a big, like a warehouse up there by the bridge where the Boiled Springs are. And they unload all that stuff off those flatboats. Well, gradually, they got so much going on that they built a store there in the town of Denmark, and then the town kind of grew around that. And like you were saying, the railroad came and talked about coming through, you know, the Jackson to Memphis Railroad. And, the Denmark residents, they put all their money together and got all their politics right and greased everybody's hand, and the railroad didn't come. And, so then there was more talk again of a railroad coming from Jackson to Memphis. The Denmark people, they got all fired up, got everything together, you know, and they said, oh, it's coming through, you know. Well, it didn't come. Well, the third time they talked to the railroad, the Denmark people said, the heck with y'all, we put forward and nothing's happened. And so the railroad did come and went through Mercer. And that was the beginning of the end for Denmark. And
Railroad crosses the Hatchie River.
yeah, the railroad bed and the trestle that goes across the river is just like right here. You have to go under it to go back to the basin. But the old railroad bridge is still there. They've taken the tracks up, but you could still, we used to ride our dirt bikes from up at the airport all the way to Hatchie River on the old railroad bed, because it had all that gravel and all those good bridges and all. But since then, people have let it grow up and fenced it, and you can't get through there now. But anyway, there were, did you tell about the fires?
That's what I was fixing to do, the decline in Denmark.
All right.
Bobby's told you about the railroad, you know, after 3 times, they said, forget it, we're not putting up any more money, we're done. Well, in 1866, the railroad went through Mercer. And so that was like a nail in the coffin. And then in 1867, fire destroyed the entire business section of Denmark. And as you can see, there were lots of stores and lots to be destroyed, because there were old wooden structures, and when one caught on fire, you know, they just all went. And then in 1905, there were more fires. Once we had rebuilt, then they had another fire. 1909, they called it a cyclone hit, which we know as a tornado, and destroyed a lot of what was left there. In 1914, the Baptist church closed. In 1924, there were more fires. 1953, the Methodist church closed. 1966, the last train through Hatchie Station, so the railroad even abandoned Mercer. And the Denmark census in 1976, they said there were 69 people in Denmark, and Mr. Stephen Carter said he didn't believe there were even that many. And in 1983, Denmark lost its charter and became unincorporated. So we're just a little spot in the road now, but we have a proud heritage. And I thank y'all for listening to our story. Yeah, I want to finish, I want to finish with, this
Wait,
is a.
before you do that, I was gonna say, Allison, you'll appreciate this. People have said that the insurance companies bought the town of Denmark with all those fires.
With all the fires, yeah. I love reading Mr. Novell's papers, and they are on file at Union University. He was the historian for Denmark, and he has lots and lots of papers and lots of really interesting stories, fun stories. You know, Ricky did some of them for our cemetery walk. This is and he wrote poems. And this is a poem he wrote, The Town of Yesterday, and it's about Denmark. The moonbeams fall gently o'er the old town of the past, and I seem to hear them whisper, time is fleeting, fleeting fast. And the sunlight lingers softly o'er some well-beloved spot, like a benediction which murmurs, not forgot. Night is drawing close on the old town of the past, and the days are growing short, and the end is near at last. But when night does come and the old town fades away, there'll be for a memory of the town of yesterday.
And Joanne, you can probably confirm this, but several people that do Fontville told me that when you're portraying it, you start with Well, that's how every story.
But he's gonna have a sense of humor, and I'll tell you that one too. So you know.
She mentioned the papers at Union University, just from the 4 or 5 of his stories that I got to hear and read. If y'all ever get the chance, go read some of Von Bonneville's, because he was truly a storyteller. And back in the 40s, and I guess maybe into the 50s, he had a regular column in the Jackson Sun where he told those stories. The Harvard brothers and some of them that you mentioned are some of the ones that
I would
that I
tell
heard
you
you
this.
tell about.
Characters.
He said that he had, and he was laughing because this is true, because my grandmother complained. He would borrow stuff from people and he wouldn't give it back. And he told me this, and he's sort of grinning, and he said, and he kept stuff upstairs, and my grandmother had complained because I don't know what she had loaned him, but he did not give it back. And he was remembering that when he told me that, and he,